Okay, we're live. Welcome to our March. It is still March, right? Yes, we're
Yes.
almost in April. March Liberalism and Practice panel discussion. We're doing something a little bit different this month. We have started to have a conversation for those of you who might follow ILB a little more consistently. You will have noted that starting at the end of last year, Angel and I started a conversation on faith and liberalism that we are continuing. We've done 2 series. Then after that, Jonathan Rausch asked us to do a book review or a podcast on his forthcoming book. Well, at the time it was a forthcoming book on Christianity and politics. Cross Purposes was the name of that. And so Matt, Elizabeth, and I did a book club around that. And then Angel and I also talked about it. And so we decided we were all enjoying so much this idea of how we talk about faith, how we talk about politics, where the two intersect, that we decided to have a monthly panel discussion around faith and, kind of the U.S. experiment, if you will, not only U.S., but, the fact that we're all sitting here, we're really looking at Christianity in the U.S. in particular, but we won't always focus necessarily on Christianity or on the U.S. Today we are. So our question that we have asked, everyone, or the name of the panel is, do we need religion? And again, for those of you who may have followed, Angel and I have had this discussion. We had this discussion with Jonathan Rausch. So we thought we'd bring us all together. And as Angel said in our last discussion, every discussion is new, right, Angel? So we kind of played around with what questions should we ask? We don't want to go back and ask like kind of the same questions. But I mean, the 4 of us have never been in a room together. So with all that said, to our audience, I want to remind you that any questions you may have of us during the conversation, that is the purpose of a panel discussion, that you can put them into our IL Values Twitter, X, or YouTube, and we'll get to those as we discuss too. So we went back and forth for our audience, and Angel, this is new to you too, but we went back and forth trying to figure out what are the best questions to ask, and do we need religion? We've touched on that before. And Matt really kind of came up with a stable of questions. And Matt, I'm sorry to throw you under the bus or to put you on the spot, because you kind of, you rallied around all of our various questions and thoughts. I'm going to let you kind of take the lead on this discussion, and we will all jump in as we are wont to do. So with that, take it away.
Very good. Well, thank you. And Angel, this is the first time that I've got to speak with you, and love the opportunity. I've listened to your podcast when you were doing things with FAIR, and that was my first exposure, and just found that we have many things in common, and appreciate your work. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Great to meet you.
You betcha. So I think there were just a few questions that we had. The first one was, just in terms of the United States and the civics that we live within and so forth, just the relationship between religion. It was interesting that the founders included religion in the First Amendment, and it's curious that they talked a little bit about that they don't, we typically talk a little bit about that Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of religion. Then there's also or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And so there's a question about, what is the relationship between speech, between press, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, petitioning the government, and religion. Why would they include religion in the First Amendment? And as Elizabeth and Jennifer and I have spoken before, is religion necessary? Is it a tax? Is it unnecessary? But or what is why would the founders include religion in the First Amendment? And just wanted to maybe start there, as in terms of what is the relationship between religion and those other freedoms? What are your thoughts on that? Why would the founders include religion, or why would it be important to include?
Should I?
Or not?
Yeah, we're putting you on the spot now, Angel.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not surprised that it was included because the first settlers were, a bunch of people who wanted to practice their religion as they saw fit, couldn't do that under the King of England. So this is where they ended up. And so I can imagine it would be top of mind for anybody thinking about the situation at the time. But also, I'm sure most people at the time of the drafting of the founding documents were religious people. And maybe they had a bunch of different ideas. I know the founders did regarding religion and specifically Christianity, what sect of Christianity, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they could already see, they were prescient in so many ways. And they were very attuned to human nature in so many ways. So I think they could see the writing on the wall, so to speak, that, this is a problem we're going to have to make a point to avoid.
Yeah.
So let people practice whatever religion they like. Let's not have an official religion, an official American religion. Let's not do that because we've seen how that works out. Tends not to be great for a lot of people. So I'm not surprised that that's in there. And also, yeah, I can see how it ties together with the other freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment: speech, assembly, petitioning the government, all those wonderful freedoms that we take for granted. Because it's, one's religion is a form of expression. Practicing it is a form of expression. Wearing a cross or the Star of David or, a hijab or whatever you want to do. Those are forms of expression that are important to people if they have religious beliefs. So I can see that easily tying in. So I'm not surprised that it's there. So that's the first part of your question. What was the second part?
Is it necessary today though, or is it? I mean, have we evolved as a society? I think the extension of our discussion today is Jonathan Rauch's premise that the loss of religion has correlated with some other societal impacts, and what would like your thoughts on that is you've shared some I think some really interesting thoughts about how you practice your life, how you live your life, and is it really necessary?
Well, I would say no, but it's a qualified no, because what I think, if I was just going to answer literally, do we need religion? My answer would be no. What we need is community. We need ritual. We need a sense of purpose and meaning. We need some kind of narrative by which to align ourselves and our behavior and our lives and understand it. And we need, I think the vast majority of us need some kind of feeling or connection to something greater than themselves. That's what we need. And our religions, our traditional religions, have historically monopolized on providing those things for people to varying degrees of effectiveness. But for the most part, that's where a lot of people got those things because that's where their parents got it. And so they're going to give it to them. And it just goes on for generation to generation. So my real contention here would be pointing out that religion is used as a kind of one size fits all or one stop shop for all of those things that we actually need. And we're all making the mistake of thinking that what we need is the religion, when really it's the things that religion has historically provided. And what I would say is that we have better versions of many of those things, if not all of them. And that, our traditional religious structures and systems and beliefs are severely lacking in many ways. And we can get into that stuff, but that's basically where I'm at.
Great. So, and this probably now extends into our discussion that we had with Jonathan and our prior discussions as well, because we're talking about religion in general. The thing that I found interesting about cross purposes was that I think Jonathan did a nice job of differentiating different ways that people sometimes practice religion. and there's a thin religion that is more of maybe a religion of convenience that doesn't have the ability to influence as strongly as to influence the culture, but is more influenced by the culture. That there's an imbalance, a trade imbalance there, and so it's not providing the structures that are necessary to support democracy. And then, of course, sharp religion that is politicized, that is imposed, and that divides. And then thick religion that does involve sacrifice, that involves a trade with democracy, where there's structures that are set up and established. And so I think we're talking about religion in general, and that there is this thick religion, and there is a point where maybe religion typically does have some impact. And what I mentioned to Elizabeth and Jennifer is, I don't want to impose, or superimpose my worldview on them, and I don't expect them. What I told them from the get-go is, I don't expect you to believe what I believe, but I do believe that belief is ubiquitous, and that everyone has some core beliefs that guide our lives. And in your conversations with Elizabeth and Jennifer, I was very impressed with how you described, the things that you do, that, you're practicing your beliefs 24/7. You're in church all the time, that the people who are around you, they're your congregation. That's how you live your life.
Right.
And in many ways that I think suggests, that's maybe some evidence of thick religion. But there are ways that I think religion can contribute, but are there ways that religions also erode or corrupt democracy, society, and civic responsibility? And Elizabeth and Jennifer, feel free to jump in here, but I think that's a reasonable question that we could ask is, how can, or how does religion, belief in something that may not be empirically supported, or belief in something that's beyond ourselves, belief in something that requires us to act upon those beliefs, how does that impact our society? And and what are what are those beliefs? So Jennifer, Elizabeth, anything you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, I'll be contrary. I think religion has been consistently used to insult the dignity of individuals and groups. I think it's consistently been used as a justification for various inequalities, to blame other people for being unhappy or frustrated or uncertain, or in some kind of prolonged physical or emotional pain. And I think it constrains free expression and thoughtful inquiry. So yeah, I think that there are lots of negatives to religion, and to even go back to your previous point, about whether religion is necessary, and Angel's point. I think it's pretty hard to argue that religion is necessary from a a psychological perspective. Religion specifically is necessary, but I do think that it may be a natural sort of a necessary outgrowth of our humanity, that we need those explanations. It may not be necessary, but it may sort of be inevitable. All cultures have religion, which suggests that that there's something in it for humanity, right? Because otherwise, all cultures, in the world would not have one. It's used to explain certain things, like you said. So I don't see it as, again, necessary, but perhaps inevitable. But maybe as we have more and more scientific explanations, it may be less inevitable over time. But so yeah, I have my negatives about about religion in general, and I agree with you to a large extent about its maybe I wouldn't call it necessary, but it's inevitability, I guess.
See, this is where I think it's really important for us to define our terms, right? Because we can use the term religion in the sense that, like, we can say all people need religion, and by that we mean all people need fundamental beliefs by which they structure their lives, right? Sure. I'm not going to disagree with that. I think that's 100% true. I think that's what Elizabeth is talking about with the inevitability. We're wired a certain way. We run on narratives. We need stories. We need explanations. We need cause and effect systems in our lives just to understand what's going on and how we should operate. Those are inevitable. I agree. I don't think it's inevitable or necessary for us to have specific structures based around certain postulates or certain hypotheses, certain statements about the nature of reality.
There's basically no evidence for that, right? I mean,
right, that we cannot prove, and then it becomes part of the deal is, no, of course you can't prove it, and that's the point. Right? I don't think there's any need for that. I think that we can learn as we continue to evolve as a species and a society. We can learn to be more comfortable saying, I have no idea. I have no idea why that happens. I have no idea how that happens. I have no idea if there is a why we're here or anything like that. We can do that sort of stuff. So yeah, we need to be clear about what it is we mean. Like, do we need a building that we go to once a week? Do we need these fundamental beliefs that are just taken on faith? Are those necessary? I would say no. But if we're talking about, do we as human beings need fundamental beliefs upon which we operate and communicate and create our structures and societies? I would say absolutely yes. So
we'd never get out of bed, right? If we didn't, because if we didn't believe that when we got out of bed, we would be stepping on something solid, then we would never get right. I mean, we have certain beliefs about the world. And I think, individuals certainly differ on the need to explain things that we don't understand. Like you said, I just don't get how electricity works. I just don't get it. It feels magic. Do I think it's God? I do not. Right? I know that there is a scientific explanation. I just don't understand it. And even things for which I know there isn't yet a scientific explanation, I trust that there will be one, that we could figure it out. I don't believe that there's some miracles that we'll never understand. Maybe I won't live to the to the extent that we'll understand it. But I think that it's explainable. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not knowing now. And I don't need, some other worldly explanation.
Well, Matt, I'd love to hear, you and I have talked about this obviously a lot, and you and I are, the two Christians, if you will, in the room. But I'd love to have you answer that question as, I feel like, and I've said this before, in context with Angel, I feel like I need that operating system. For me, I'm very committed to my faith. What do you for you, what Angel and Elizabeth are saying is you can have these good things and you put it together in a way that's not necessarily religion. What do you say to something like that?
Well, I think the things that Elizabeth just described, I think those things describe both thin and sharp religion. I don't think that all thick religion is immune from that. I think what we're looking for is a civic theology that can bridge us, that helps us recognize that there are differences, and that diversity, diversity of thought, viewpoint diversity, political diversity, religious diversity, pluralism needs as a foundation some type of orientation toward or belief in truth, in some type of truth. And there are different types of truth. There are scientific truths. There are linguistic truths or literary truths. There are spiritual or revealed truths. But in order for us to live civically in a pluralistic society, we have to be able to be free to choose our beliefs, and they can't be imposed. And I think when religion moves out of its context, or moves when it's imposed or it's not voluntary, that I think is when it becomes a problem. And that's when, if we have a government imposed religion or a state sanctioned religion, I think that becomes a problem, because then it's not voluntary. It loses its religious nature, because it's no longer a choice. It's no longer a belief. It then becomes, it's more likely to become thin or sharp, if you will, and divisive. So I guess what I'm suggesting is that as we're talking here, I think that a thick religion that contributes to civic theology is important in our realm, and there is something, I think, supernatural. Angel I've heard him disagree with this, and that's okay. I think we're different on that. I do believe that there is something beyond our nature that binds us together, and it's not divided by religious differences, political differences, ideological differences. That we are all human beings. There's something divine in all of us. And I don't expect anybody else on this panel necessarily to believe that, if you choose not to, because I can respect you for that. We talk and we share those differences, but there is something that's unempirical that just seems to work. It draws something out of us that is divine when we have a world where civic theology is more predominant rather than some of these other would you say sharp or thin religious practices.
So let me repeat what I heard you say, just to make sure I understood, Angel. I know you're about ready to respond, but you're saying that, if I heard you correctly, that if we've got a civic theology with a rich or a thick religion, be that Christianity or whatnot, that we are more apt to act in the divine, or act, that lighten us, and therefore, live in a society that's more civic minded. Is that what did I interpret what you said right?
Yeah, and we need to be able to tolerate differences. We need to be able to dialogue across difference. We need to be able to countenance those other differences. Just as you described at the end of your conversation with Angel, your conversation with him enriched you. It strengthened your beliefs because it helped sharpen in a helpful way, your ability to recognize and define what you believe. That's what I understood.
So I wouldn't necessarily disagree with what you were saying about there's something beyond us that is a kind of a fundamental connectedness, and depending on if you get a little more poetic with your definition of divine, I can go with you there as well, because I believe we are all stardust, and all the atoms that make up my body are also in all of your bodies and in the computers that we're using to have this conversation, and the energy that's being exchanged. It's all one giant ocean of waves moving back and forth and becoming one another, and then splitting apart briefly and then returning again. So, and I don't think there's anything that I need to believe on insufficient evidence to accept that. I think that's just a fundamental reality of our understanding of the universe thus far. And I would consider that divine, right? I mean, the cosmos, like, what could be more divine than the infinite cosmos, right? So yeah, I can go with you on that. But you say civic theology. I'm curious, why or what how would you distinguish a civic theology from a civic philosophy? What would be the difference?
Okay, so a civic philosophy would be that it's not necessarily attributed to that divine, that it's simply a theory that can be practiced, it can be refined, but it's not necessarily attributed to the supernatural, if you will. That it's not taken as a fundamental doctrinal belief, if you will, where so that when the times get tough, are you going to live true to the civic theology, or when the times get tough, are you going to say, well, it's really not that important. This is just one way of seeing things. It's just one way of believing things. Or are you going to say, no, if people believe in a certain way and they want to go down that road, that's their choice, that there are options, that there are, that I think the civic is acknowledging that there are differences, and we allow for those differences. The philosophy is simply that, it may not be as doctrinaire, if you will.
So for the civic theology, it's all grounded on this axiom of we are endowed by our creator, and there's a creator, right?
Exactly.
Whereas a philosophy would not necessarily even broach that premise, and kind of just operate based on these are the rules we're choosing to live by.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, a few questions arise from that distinction you're making. The first is, what if somebody questions the axiomatic premise of the divine, of the supernatural being that is the bedrock for all this stuff? Because that's what's going to happen, right? You're going to get an 8-year-old kid like me asking all these questions, and being unsatisfied with the answers, and that's going to put them on a path to being who they are and believing what they believe right now. And now we have two people coexisting, or two groups of people coexisting in this society, operating based on the civic philosophy, because I fully agree with the fundamental tenets of our founding documents and the principles and ideals of America. Totally with you on all of those. I'm never going to go back on those, but I don't agree with you on the fundamental premise. Right. So we can coexist. You can say, that's fine. You're still doing the thing. And I'll say, great. But then what's the point of the axiom if it's clearly not necessary? So that's one challenge. The second is, what about when somebody questions it, and then because they question that and they find no satisfactory answers, they begin to question the philosophy as well. And they say, well, why should I care about my civic duties? Why should I care about these freedoms? Why do these freedoms matter? You base them all on this premise that seems false or unprovable to me. So why should I care? What's going to be your justification then? You can't lean on the axiom anymore, because the axiom has been obliterated in their view. So there's that. And then there's just we're kind of being wishy-washy with Christianity. I haven't read John Rauch's books, so I can't comment too much on it, but I've heard him talk about it on a couple of podcasts and things, and I kind of get where he's coming from. But, Jen and I talked about this. To be a Christian, you have to believe certain things. There's a barrier to entry. You have to affirm certain beliefs, or else you're not a Christian. You may be acting as a Christian. You can do all the things without believing this stuff, but you wouldn't really be a Christian. And it's actually kind of an insult to Christians to say, well, I'm a Christian, I just don't believe all that stuff. So those are three problems with the framework there.
All right, so go back to the first one. The first one is,
the first one is, I'm someone who does not appear to need the axiom.
Endowed by our creator, that all men are created equal.
Right. Okay. I just say we're created equal. Fundamentally, and I don't really need to justify that with something that I can't prove. Okay. So there's that.
Okay. So if you can't prove it, if there's insufficient evidence to suggest that you're endowed by your creator, we could debate, and there's been debates forever about that.
Mhm.
My point on that is if it's fundamental, you will act on that. You will continue to act on that, even when it's difficult, even when it may not be in your own immediate self-interest. You will persist in that if you attribute it to something beyond yourself.
Well, I don't attribute it to anything beyond myself, in the sense that these are rules that humans made up because humans are conscious and living with each other, and we have to come up with rules. I don't think that, I don't think, for example, that don't kill anybody is a rule that would exist if all humans vanished from the face of the earth.
Right.
That we're getting into weird philosophical deconstructionist territory now, but
Sure.
but I have the convictions that I do because I firmly believe it's the best way for us to coexist, and that's enough.
Okay.
That's one of the things that bothers me about religion is like I crave that we're enough.
Mhm.
That right here, right now, that we are enough. That I value you enough in the moment to not harm you. I don't need, or why should I need? I resent that other people need another reason other than who I am to treat me well or whatever. And must we persist? Why must I persist? I don't have to, right? And there's so I don't, yeah. I mean, I kind of resent. So maybe it's enough right now, and if it becomes not enough, I don't need to persist. That's okay.
Mm.
Well, I think just the fact that you're asking a why.
No, I'm asking you why. I don't ask why, because I don't believe that anyone cares. I don't believe the system cares. I don't believe anyone cares. I don't believe I was put here for a reason. I don't believe I'm part of something bigger. Now, I'm not saying that in any given moment I might contribute to society in some way. But I don't believe that I was put here for that. I mean, if I were, I'm an abject failure. So yeah, it's like
So you don't believe that, Elizabeth, but what do you believe?
I'm an accident. I get up every morning, I breathe in and out, and I do the things that I do to a large extent out of habit. I'm just doing them. Before I know it, they're done. The day is over. I'm not reflecting on the why I'm here questions. I'm not reflecting. I'm certainly, don't get me wrong, I'm plenty depressed about things, and I'm plenty happy about some other things, but I'm not engaged in this ongoing sort of larger question, and so and yet up to this point, 61 and so many years, so many months, I persist, but I don't feel any obligation to do so. And so to anyone or anything other than, in the moment, so I don't know. I mean, when Angel, so you don't know this, but when these questions first came out, we've been through multiple questions, but I kept saying, I don't understand the questions. Like the questions don't make sense to me. And so, so I'm even coming from a different perspective than you are. You were, sort of raised with religion, or, early on. Right. And this idea, you say, oh, well, we're all part of the same, our molecules. And it's like, I don't even get that. Like, it's like, it's lovely. It's poetic. I'm not saying I've never momentarily felt, I like the idea of like if you go to a religious service, you all stand up at the same time, you all sing the same verse, and there's sort of that nice sense of, everybody being on the same, we're not at each other's throats for that, whatever hour. If it's a Catholic ceremony, it's exactly an hour, right? The routine.
You've clearly never been there.
Yeah.
Which
people do not
Catholic
make it the hour. We're comparing clothes, we're judging, we're doing all kinds of stuff in there.
Yeah. I think both of you have asked the question, though, you've asked why questions. And I think those are the things that ultimately come. The why questions are oftentimes unempirical, unprovable, and this is where pluralism comes into play, is that your why questions, there needs to be space for your why questions. Yeah. And those are the things that are oftentimes the religious. And so your axiom, if you wonder, why do I need that axiom? Well, that in and of itself is a question. Well, what is the evidence that I believe, that I'm not going to believe anything for which there's insufficient evidence? Well, there's a lot of things that we believe on insufficient evidence. We typically, I prefer empiricism. It gives us more certainty, those kinds of things. But there are a lot of other things that I don't know that there's a great deal of certainty on. And so, just asking the why, I think, gives space for people for there to be a different degree of why, or different whys throughout our society.
Right. But that leads to the second scenario, right? Where someone starts questioning the fundamental basis, and we can't give good answers to those.
Okay.
Where it's possible for someone like me to ask those questions and feel that all the answers are unsatisfactory.
Yeah.
And this didn't occur with me. This didn't happen with me, but it can very easily happen where they go, okay, well, the fundamental basis is clearly just dubious. So why should I care about any of it? I'm not going to care about any of it. Now I'm going to question the entire enterprise.
Right.
Well,
and I think what happens there, if Jennifer, did you want to comment before I respond?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So my thought there is that when you take religion or faith or belief out of its appropriate context, when you take a value or an ideology out of its appropriate context, that's when there's a problem, and it does corrupt.
Okay.
And it does make you question and wonder the validity of other things.
Okay.
An axiom that Jesus himself said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When you take things out of context and you use a religious response for something that isn't necessarily religious, I think you limit your ability to reason. I think you limit the exploration of the scientific methods. You limit your ability to develop linguistic capabilities, literary capabilities. So you need to practice your thick religion in a way that is true to the religious, not necessarily trying to take religion out of its context.
Okay. I'm with you so far, but it makes me wonder again about the civic theology thing. That seems to be exactly what you just said we shouldn't do, which is pulling religion out of its context and using it as a fundamental basis for civic society, not a spiritual journey.
No. Well, okay. Thank you for asking about that. What I'm suggesting there is, in order for theology and religion to work in democracy, in our democracy, it needs to sustain pluralism.
Okay.
It should not drive sectarianism or say that my beliefs should be what everybody else believes. There needs to be freedom to choose or not to choose.
Right. Okay.
So that's what I mean by civic theology.
That works fine, I think. But if what I'm getting at, and I may not be articulating it as clearly as I want to, but what I'm getting at is, if the civic theology, the fundamental basis for why we believe the rules are what they are, and we should treat each other in certain ways and behave in certain ways, these social contracts that we create.
Yes.
The fundamental justification for it is theological, then we've entered a different context. We've added the theological stuff as the foundational aspect of our social contract and using it to justify those rules. So when someone says, why should I care about free speech, the answer, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in this civic theology, the idea is, why should I care about free speech? Why should I care about these fundamental freedoms like that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights and all these things? We would say, well, because we are endowed by our creator with these inalienable rights. And someone goes, okay, but who's the creator? How do we know that? Where's the proof for this? When they start questioning that thing, we now have to retreat to the theology and say, well, you have to kind of take that on faith because we don't have evidence for it. Right. And then they'll say, well, if you don't have evidence for that, then you're justifying this thing on nothing, and I can just be gone with all of it. Whereas,
I think you're okay with that. I think if you choose not to believe that we are endowed with our creator, that we just have rights, whether we're endowed by our creator or not, that's where the civic theology comes into play, where you get to believe that there is no creator, and I get to believe that there is, but both of those things are beliefs.
Okay.
I'm not going to prove it to you. You're not going to prove it to me, but we're going to engage. Your faith is not my faith. My faith is not yours, but we're going to engage. We're going to find our way together.
Okay. So we are getting somewhere. It may not seem like it, but I really do think we're getting somewhere here, because what that does for me is eliminate the variable of the theology completely, right? If it's possible for us to coexist based on our mutual agreement on these social principles, despite our disagreement on the theological principles are not necessary to the equation at all. They may be personally necessary for individuals, right? It may be that, someone feels better or just prefers it to ground those principles in a theological framework, but it's clearly not necessary for someone to value those principles and live by them while not believing or accepting the fundamental premise, right? So those people can coexist.
Mm-hmm.
That leads me to that basically emphasizes what I was saying earlier, which is, no, we don't need this. It's not necessary. What we need are the social principles, those fundamental principles that we agree upon as human beings. We say, these are the rules by which we're going to live. I agree. I'm not going to take your stuff. You won't try to kill me. You're not going to take my stuff. I won't try to kill you. Cool. We don't have to be constantly looking over our shoulders and worried about each other. We can coexist now in a much better way for us. That seems self-evidently a better way to live. And we can scale that.
And why do you believe that?
Why do I believe that it's better?
It's self-evidently a better way to live.
My wiring basically makes it inevitable that if I were in a situation where I was constantly concerned that everyone around me was trying to take my things or do me physical harm, my wiring would just dictate, like, that's not an ideal situation for you to be in, and you're going to have to move, right? That's the fundamental.
Yeah, in your prior conversation, I can't remember if it was with Jen or with Elizabeth, you just acknowledged that's the way we're wired.
Right.
That's the way that we're wired.
Yeah.
And you get to believe that that's just for whatever reason, and I can believe that that is the way we're wired, and that's divinely appointed. We're
sure.
divine, that's just nature of the divine, but we'll find our way together. And I respect your belief that you don't have to believe what I believe, but it's important that we acknowledge that there are beliefs there.
Yes,
and it's okay.
There are beliefs. Yeah, for sure. There are beliefs.
Yeah.
But it's about where they're grounded.
Great.
Well, I think that, Matt, if I may, I think the way you're using the word theology is almost can be translated as belief. So am I missing something here? If you're saying we have civic beliefs, and in that civic belief, Angel can believe that we are, stardust, and we can believe that, we're a product of, God, and so are you using theology really just as belief and acknowledgement?
It's a coherent belief system.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so in that case, we don't disagree. I mean, we can quibble about which fundamental belief system works better. My tendency is to say that fundamental principle of like I don't have to say I can say what is right, what a fact about who we are,
Mm-hmm.
the vast majority of us, and the exceptions prove the rule.
Right.
Is hand on hot stove, immediate recoil.
Right.
Right. That's just biological genetic wiring. There's
Yep.
nothing we could do about that. It just
Materialistic.
happens.
Yep. It's just
Right?
the way that we're wired.
So I can ground everything on that.
Mm-hmm.
And we can ask the question, why are we wired that way? And I'm very happy to wonder about that. But I don't need to come up with an answer to that question in order for the system to work.
Sure.
Right. Because the scenario that we were just talking about where, you don't take my stuff, you don't try to kill me, I will do the same. And it works better for us.
Mm-hmm.
All of that boils down to that very fundamental thing of hand on hot stove, immediate recoil. Our job, so to speak, as these beings that we're wired, is to avoid needless suffering and to pursue flourishing.
Right.
That's the game we're playing. That's just fundamentally what we're doing. Flowers lean toward the sun. Like, it's just the way things work.
Yeah.
Why do they work that way? I have no idea. It's wonderful to think about and wonder about and speculate. And I don't think that personally, I have no desire to pretend to know the answers to those questions. And I worry that if we ground our social contracts and our rules on an answer to those questions, we might get in trouble. Whereas if we just ground it on the fact that it's self-evidently true that if everyone lived in a place where they didn't have to worry about being murdered, that would be a better world than the opposite. We can ground it on that, and everything just works from there mathematically almost. And sure, it gets complicated when you scale, but it works really, really well without that fundamental premise. So why even introduce the premise, which may muddy things up and make it complicated?
We do, of course, we do have scientific evidence that suggests that people who live, say, in war-torn areas, grow up in that year after year after year after year, suffer the area, whether that's a country or larger than a single country, suffers, well beyond the period of war, and the mistrust, the Stasi, encouraging people to, tell on each other, to inform and everything. That there's evidence that mistrust of your neighbor persists even today in the form of lower GDP and lower risk taking in terms of new businesses and so flourishing, as you would say, sort of relationships. People have fewer relationships. There is this long-term effect. So again, I don't think you need religion to for that. We can see again that we should be enough, because it's going to contribute to human flourishing in the short term and in the long term, long after some kind of traumatic or catastrophic event. So yeah, we do have evidence of that.
Yeah, we do.
Now, that's a beautiful belief that we are enough.
So I'm gonna introduce a little. What are we at 7:49? I'm gonna introduce a little. So I think, because I've picked on Jen and Matt a little bit about this before, where I feel very much like I'm being pressured to believe that I have a belief, to believe that I have some sort of organized. I don't know. I don't want to call it religion, but some sort of belief
set of principles.
they want me so badly to
Mhm.
have one. And so it makes
Oh, this
them
is
feel
good.
better for me to
This
have
is good.
it, right?
I don't
And so I'm
agree.
thinking to myself, it's
I don't
almost
agree.
like, no, okay.
No.
Well, that's sometimes how I feel, that I feel
Okay.
pressured to agree, to conform, or to just agree in order, because I guess I'm feeling like illegitimately so apparently that I need to do it to make you all feel better. And I feel like it's sort of like, well, it's sort of like, well, Elizabeth, like cheese is like the bomb. I mean, you got to have cheese. It's like, no, I'm allergic to cheese. I don't really like cheese. No,
Oh man,
we'll tell you.
that's a
We'll
shame.
tell you that whether you like cheese or not. You've
Elizabeth,
got cheese in your refrigerator.
Why
We know
are
you
you
have
coming up
cheese
with
in
this stuff?
there. No, I really don't. I'm allergic to cheese. No, Elizabeth,
Okay,
there's cheese in
this is
there,
great.
and we're gonna find it for you, and we're gonna tell you what you like.
wow.
This is great.
Wow,
This is great.
mercy.
So-
I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Yeah, if you got that impression,
I'm
my job is
sorry.
to convert. My
I
goodness.
apologize.
Wow.
Conversation was a little too
Wow.
pleasant. I had to interject.
So this is great because I haven't been privy to your previous conversations, the three of you, but now we're two Christians and two lions, but now the lions are going to go at it, which is great. So Elizabeth, if I'm understanding you right, you're saying that are you saying that you feel pressured to conform to the idea that you have a belief system?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think killing people is wrong?
Mostly, yes.
Okay. And do you have an answer to the question why you believe killing people is
I
wrong?
do not.
You just feel it, and
I mean,
it's just
because again, like, sometimes I think that there are times probably when there could be a time when I would feel
Sure.
as though killing someone was my best
sure.
choice.
Generally speaking.
And so it's,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. Let me reframe it. So generally speaking, if you lived in a neighborhood or a city where everyone was constantly trying to kill everyone else,
Oh yeah,
would
this
you
would
think?
be bad.
Yeah. So that would be bad.
Yeah. I mean, I just told you there's
And-
scientific evidence for this, right?
Right.
And I know what happens to the brain when we live
Uh-huh.
in an area, when we live under constant stress. The brain
Right.
actually changes and doesn't change back. So,
Right. So
right.
you're talking now about the psychological effects of living in a place like that.
Right.
Right. And so you would label that situation bad.
Bad
And
for
if
human, yeah.
yeah, and when if someone asked you why would you label it bad, at least part of your answer would talk about the psychological suffering and maybe the missed opportunities, right, that people have as a result of that circumstance. That's a belief that you have. That's a belief system that you have. You have fundamental principles where, yes, there are exceptions, right? If someone breaks into your house and the only way to survive is to kill this intruder, you understand that that's a reality. But generally speaking, if people were killing each other all the time, you'd say that's not a good thing for us generally. And you would probably agree that that's a good rule for everyone to have, not just you, right? Because if you're the only one who has it, you're still in trouble, right? So, I mean, you do have a belief system. That's a foundational belief about how the world is and how the world should be and how you want to live in it and how you think other people should live in it. I think that's all it is.
Okay.
So now I'm pressuring you to accept.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the thing that we were talking about earlier. I don't think it's possible for us not to have beliefs in terms of, this is the way that I should spend my day. This is the most productive use of my time. This is the thing I should eat, even if I end up eating something different. This is what I should be eating. And I know that I should be eating this. And when you ask why, well, it's healthier, it's better for my body, I'm going to feel better, I'm going to have more energy, right? There's all these reasons. But that's your belief. You have a belief system. You're operating on foundational principles.
It isn't, I guess it isn't that it isn't that I don't agree with that sort of very low level, basic kind of thing. I don't think that belief system whatever it is,
Mhm.
makes me sort of a better human being. I think it makes me sort of the baseline of human being.
Well,
I don't think it's, I'm not,
well,
it's like, that's like the lowest common denominator, I
see,
guess.
but
It doesn't make me better.
you're still betraying your moral principles there, because you're saying this shouldn't even chart in terms
Mm,
of being a good
mhm.
person. It's just the baseline. Like,
Right.
don't murder people. But that's a moral baseline you have where it to you it's unthinkable to even exist beneath it, right? And for in your eyes, for someone to actually deserve the label good person, they have to go way past that.
Right. Right.
Like, hey, I don't kill anybody. I'm a great guy, aren't I?
Right.
You
Right.
would say that's
Uh,
it. Like,
yeah, that's
you're
all you
not
got.
supposed to. Right. You're not supposed to kill people. Like, what did you do today? Did you help somebody? Right. So you have rules. All those things betray a certain rule set that you have. Those are moral principles. You're a moral person. So I don't think there's any escaping that. What I think you mean is that you don't have a kind of universal why. Like, why is this happening beyond? You don't have a universal why for, don't kill people, beyond the fact that it has these immediate and second order effects on human experience. That's what's really going on, right? You don't have a cosmic, like, well,
Right.
because dad said so.
Right.
It's because, well, look at what happens when we live in a place like that. So you and I we have the exact same framework. But I guess there's something icky to you about it, calling it a belief.
Hey, I've got a question for you, Angel. Do
Okay.
you believe that you're an accident?
Accident is loaded when you ask it like that.
I'm playing off of
But
what Elizabeth had said earlier. So
but
I'm
but yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's some reason that I'm here. A better way to say it is I have no way of knowing that there's some kind of overarching purpose to my existence. I have no idea. I have no reason to believe that there is one. So I don't worry about it too much. But based on what I know, I think it's a miracle that I'm here because, it was inevitable that I would become a conscious being named Angel Eduardo, who's here existing with you all, because it happened. But it's, statistically speaking, infinitesimally improbable, right? And I look at it that way. I look at it as it's a gift that I'm here. Don't know if there's a why, and if there is a why, I don't know what it is. Probably will never know what it is if there is one, but I don't really need to, because I can simply acknowledge the fact that I am here right now. I am alive and breathing. I'm conscious. I'm able to experience this life, this existence, and ponder it, right? I can turn the consciousness onto itself and contemplate the consciousness with my consciousness. I can just create that loop. And that's amazing. It's beautiful. So, one thing that we haven't touched on that religion provides for people, and this is the thing that people say all the time to me, is, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of like, I matter in this grand scheme of things, right? We're so tiny, in front of the universe. Well, my view is, if you want to feel special, if that's what it is, if you want to feel like there's something remarkable about you, all you have to do is recognize that you have never existed ever in the history of the universe. 14 billion years. There was never a Jen Richmond, ever, until right now. And once you're gone, there will never be another Jen Richmond ever again. Maybe someone with the same name, maybe someone who looks like you, but it'll never be you. And even if there's some parallel universe where an
I was just
identical
going to
genetic
bring that
copy
up.
of you,
I'm like, what?
even if there's a genetic, atomically identical copy of you in another parallel universe, it's still not this one. So you are, by definition, unique and improbable. And that's amazing. So
All the
accident,
different Wolverines in all the different universes.
right? So accident, sure, but I don't ascribe any negative valence to that term. Yeah, it's crazy that we're here, but it's also beautiful, and those things are not mutually exclusive at all.
I give no thought to any of that. None.
You give no thought to like just paying attention to being alive.
No.
I mean, it's so cool. You don't find it remarkable? Like,
Mm.
I'm drinking water. This is weird. Isn't this
Yeah.
weird? You need to do acid, I think.
Don't just do water. Don't do acid, Elizabeth. That might change you and be unchangeable.
I've
We'll
never
have
done
that
it, so-
conversation off camera. Thank you
There
very
you go.
much.
Well,
I've never done it. I've just gone to concerts. So
but Angel, as you talk about all of those things, I mean, all of those things are very, could be seen or heard in a religious way. That those things are values, observational, experiential. Their use of your agency in choosing to describe it in that way. And you started by differentiating between knowledge and belief. In your discussion, I can't remember what it was with Elizabeth or with Jen, you differentiated between atheism and agnosticism. And,
right.
The difference between belief and knowledge.
Right.
And I think there are a lot of things that we choose to believe in. And Elizabeth, I'm sorry that you feel uncomfortable by associating with believers and feel the pressure by our beliefs. I see your belief in truth. I see in our interactions with each other. I see your belief in science and the scientific method.
Sure.
I see, and you're much smarter and empirical. You do the statistics and the data analytics stuff much more effective. So I just look at those things, and I think I can see things that you believe in, and yeah, we're different, but that's the beauty of what we're having. The discussion that we're having right now is that there are differences of beliefs, including beliefs about beliefs, and that's what I think is ultimately civic theology. Is that there's a coherent way of inviting differences and viewpoint diversity, differences in how we see things, and that there's a value in each one of these ways that we're experiencing one another.
I don't disagree. I would just say I don't see how that's theological, because the premise is not necessary for it to work. I would ask again, like, where does Christianity fit here, right? Because we're still trying to work this Christianity thing into the civic society, right? We're still trying to work this in as some kind of necessary, foundational, fundamental structure, as per John Rausch.
Okay, so I'll just give you a few. You don't have to. So 3 out of the 4 of us believe in that there's something divine or miraculous within us, but all 4 of us tend to believe that there's something of value within us, whether we call it divine or some other linguistic term. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I actually think Elizabeth agrees fully. She just doesn't tend to think about it. I imagine that if I probed her more, she would basically land where I land.
Yeah.
But maybe less poetically.
Yes, much less poetically.
But that's the beauty of poetry.
And I'm you made me think about this, and I'm like, if I wake up in the middle of the night, I already can't, I have to put on like an audiobook or something because I'm thinking and worrying. And if I had to think about this too, like, why am I awake? Oh, isn't this interesting that I'm turning over right now? It would be even worse. I don't know. There's not space. There's
There's infinite space.
Worries.
There's infinite space.
In my brain.
No, I know what you mean. I used to sleep with the television on because it was the
Yes.
only way to quiet my mind enough
Yes.
to go to sleep. That changed when I met my wife, but uh, you're it's almost like you're punching the ocean when you keep trying to avoid the thing. Like you're fighting it, right? But you're going to be fighting it forever because the ocean's just going to keep coming in. And once you realize, oh, if I just kind of ride the wave, then it all just stops. Like all the craziness that I've been fighting just dissipates. That's the magic realization, right? And it took me being with my wife.
I was just going to say, I should meet your wife.
Well, it's just being calm enough to recognize that, like, oh, there's a moment where I'm not consumed by anxiety. And then I go, oh, wow. That it's quiet. Like it happens because I have turned the volume down instead of cranking something else louder to drown out the thing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know?
You know what, Angel,
So-
that's so interesting that you said that, because for me, and I think we've mentioned this before, for me, there's a verse in the Bible about, peace beyond understanding. And it wasn't for me until I really kind of dived into that, my faith, that I found that peace, without understanding, that calm, that quietness.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of wisdom in all that stuff. I'm not dismissing it whole cloth. We've talked about that. Like, there's plenty of beauty there. There's plenty of wisdom. There's plenty of things that we can learn and apply, and it'll make things better for sure. There's a bunch of other stuff that doesn't work as well, but yeah, that's one of those things, right? Like, so that verse allowed you to actually do the thing, right? And probably the ritual of prayer, right? It's a kind of meditation.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of quieting the mind to get, finding a way to observe the din and not be caught by it and drifted off, into it. Not how Sam Harris would say is not to identify with your thoughts, kind of taking a step back and observing the thought and kind of, watching it kind of float by and then slowly just vanish into who knows where. But it's the same basic idea. That's what's going on. And again, my only contention is certain things that people think are fundamentally necessary to achieve these things. I disagree. But all the stuff that we're talking about, all those kind of second, third, fourth order things, I think are all there and beautiful and necessary. Right? We need a story. We need some cohesive narrative. We need fundamental principles that we rely upon in order to coexist. And we need some way of justifying them. But in my view, there are better and worse options for that.
So what the evidence for that? I think that's would be what Jonathan Rauch's book was about, was that there is evidence to suggest that democracy without thick religion is compromised. That thick religion, thick belief, thick practice, and by the way that you described living your beliefs and your values and being in church 24/7, I think that is an example of thick religion, whether it's your own religion or institutional religion. I'm part of an institutional religion. Either way, when you are practicing that and living that, and it's not like I'm, always in this, that it's always on, Elizabeth, where I'm always trying to find meaning in everything that's going on around me. You're right. That would drive me nuts.
Yeah. Neither am I.
Yeah, exactly. But when you do pause and you look at some of your core beliefs about your own existence, that it is pretty remarkable. It's pretty, it's you can choose to believe that you're, an accident, or you can choose to believe that you're just all right, like everybody else, or you're an accident like everybody else, or a miracle like everybody else. What I'm hearing you and Elizabeth suggest is that all of the benefits that come with institutional religion, you can achieve those without it.
Yeah, I think that's self-evidently true because I don't have traditional religion and I have all those benefits. And I know many, many people like this. So I'm not some weirdo.
Yeah.
I mean, I am, but not for that reason.
Yeah.
And I don't really buy into the whole, like, we would, that thick religion improves society, mainly because it's easy to argue that, the perfect of something is the is would sustain more perfect humanity. We don't have, there's nowhere, where can you point to where this idea of thick Christianity has taken hold for long enough, in a broad enough area for long enough to actually demonstrate that it's that this hypothesis is true. So we can't test the hypothesis. So I don't, it's totally fine to offer it, but we can never test it. And so the perfect of anything would be more perfect than an imperfect version of it.
Well, that's your go ahead.
No, you go ahead, man.
I was just going to say, that's your scientific belief system speaking there, that the empirical, the provable are the things that are most real. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
And so things that are improvable or unempirical are less real.
Yeah, belief without evidence, right? That's what your faith is.
And what I'm suggesting, there's an infinite number of things that are unprovable. There's an infinite number of things, but to me and to other believers, that lack of, there's so many things that you can't prove or disprove, that ultimately those are the things that you have to choose. And as Angel has described, that those things, get to a point where it's self-evident that you've made that choice so many times in your life that it just is second nature to you. Some of that's religiously influenced, some of that is not.
Yeah, and I don't dispute that religions have provided many great things that we've taken and run with, right? And so, I'm not one of those guys who says who says religion has been always bad and only contributed bad things, and if it never existed, we would be better off. Obviously, we've gotten a lot of good things out of these systems and structures. That's why they were created in the first place, and that's why they thrived. They obviously benefited people enough for them to continue on and all that kind of stuff. So, but Matt, Elizabeth said thick Christianity, but you keep saying thick religion, and there's a difference there, right? So if by thick religion we're doing the thing that I flagged earlier, which is some commonly shared fundamental beliefs, right? Fundamental principles, like we're not going to kill each other, we're not going to steal, all those things. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you specifically talking about thick Christianity?
Well, I practice Christianity, or I strive to practice Christianity, and repent when I don't, which I guess is practicing Christianity. But but I think there are other cultures or societies where, well, I guess I'm not aware. I guess I'm ignorant. I don't know if I can answer the question. So I guess I would use the term my own experience with Christianity. Yeah.
But if the prescription is democracy or in order for democracy to sustain itself or to thrive, we must have thick religion. And by thick religion, we mean Christianity, like those specific tenets, that specific belief system.
No. I think Christianity could I think democracy could exist in a different faith system. But in order for democracy to thrive, thick Christianity does support democracy because it believes in the individual, the divine nature of the individual, an individual worth, an individual dignity, that there's something divine, and therefore you are endowed with rights, and that thick Christianity and democracy both. Again, this probably pertains to my own organization of being pro-social. That liberal values are, I believe, inherently pro-social, freedom of religion, group belief, group adherence. That if we want to describe that as religion, thought, individual, thought, speech, as an evidence of embodied thought, that it helps us to think differently, to think in diverse ways, to think of different options, to recognize there are different paths to pursue, to be able to test those paths, and to allow people. So I do think that there are elements of Christianity that do support, and I'm not as familiar with other faiths. I'm familiar with different Christian faiths, but I've never lived in a culture where I could critique or align.
Right. Right. Well, you don't have to. The question was more about because within those principles that you mentioned earlier is freedom of religion.
Yeah.
Right. So baked into the system of democracy that you are saying is ideal, is the ability for people to believe or not believe
exactly
that thick Christianity.
Correct. Yes.
So again, I go back to questioning whether the thick Christianity is necessary. If it's possible for it to coexist with others, and I would say it's possible for democracy to exist without it, so long as there are commonly held fundamental principles, like all the principles that you just outlined, which Christianity can support or coexist with. I agree with that. But it's about whether it's necessary for
it.
That's
so
the question.
As long as we're all adhering to these same values, these same principles, we don't have to call them Christianity in order for them to work. I can choose to believe that they're based in Christianity. You can choose that they're believed in secular humanism, and we're cool.
And it doesn't matter what laws, what rules, whatever. If we're all following the same ones, we're going to get along better. And it doesn't matter why we're doing it. If we're doing, I mean, we could be doing it out of fear of each other. I mean, it's like we're still gonna live longer if we're all following the same, from the same playbook. That's just, I mean, it might not be very exciting if we're all following from the same playbook all the time. The game would be the same every day.
Even Christians don't follow the same playbook. And literally they have the same playbook.
Yeah.
Well, some of us have some extras, so.
Yeah, some people have some extra chapters and stuff.
But I think that Jonathan Roush, what I'm hearing you say too, Matt, is that Christian principles like freedom of religion, like what was baked into the Constitution, uphold, and I'm talking about not religion, Christian principles for our Constitution. And again, whether or not we need them now is not the question I'm trying to address, but Christian principles specifically, and I believe that this is what Roush was saying, when they are applied thickly, richly, they support democracy, and other religions are not as supportive of democracy, even when applied thickly, would be my understanding of both what you're saying and what Jonathan Roush says. And I would tend to agree insofar as some of the freedoms that I think are both constitutional and fundamental to Christianity.
Yeah.
So as you know, Jen, I would contest that these are Christian principles because they predate Christianity by quite a long time, many of them. So there's that. And, we can call them Christian principles because Christianity has them, although I don't know about the freedom of religion thing. But they're moral principles, really. And they were worked into Christianity. They were infused into Christianity because people said these are good values. We should systematize them. And, ancient Greece had them. Ancient Rome had them. There's this whole first half of the Bible that comes from a whole other group of people. They have a lot of those kind of principles as well. But the other problem, though, is the one that I raised to Matt earlier, the third one, which is you can't just be a nominal Christian. You can't just be a Christian in behavior only. That's not really being a Christian. You have to believe certain fundamental things. You have to take them that's the liturgy of faith, right? We believe that there is a God. There's only one God. And, there's the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Jesus was sent to earth and died for our sins. He rose on the third day, all that kind of stuff. You have to accept that in order to be a Christian. So there's a sense in which we're playing fast and loose here with what Christianity actually means.
See, that would be perfection, though. That's the ideal.
Uh-huh.
But I think most Christians can acknowledge the differentiation between belief and knowledge and can say, I do believe these other things, but there's other things that I'm not sure of that, I believe, help down my unbelief. There's a part of me that believes, but there's a part of me that's still unsure, uncertain. And I don't think all Christians are completed.
No, I wouldn't say they were, but I'm pretty sure the vast majority of Christians accept the premise of Jesus died and rose again.
Yeah.
And that he was the Son of God, etc. That's kind of the
You can't be a Christian if you don't believe in Christ.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. It's in the name, right?
That is exactly it. That it's belief. It may be incomplete, but it's belief. It's just not. Yeah. Okay. Very good.
That's what I mean, though, is that if we're talking about thick Christianity, right, and we're talking about Christian principles, even if I grant that they are Christian principles, right, even if I just say fine, it's still not Christianity until you accept those premises. You have to. So, and if we're not doing that, if what John Rauch, the gay atheist Jew, is talking about thick Christianity, he clearly doesn't buy into many of these premises, right? But he's saying this framework works. What he's really saying, and again, I haven't read his book, so I'm kind of riffing off of what you guys have been saying. So I may be wrong in how I'm characterizing this. But what he's really saying is these fundamental moral principles are the foundation that we need in order for democracy to thrive. And it reminds me of Judge Learned Hand talking about, the First Amendment. Liberty lies in the hearts of men and women. And if it dies there, no law, no rule, no society could ever resurrect it, or I forget the exact wording, but basically, it's not about the law; it's about us believing in the principle. So, really, what we're talking about are these fundamental moral principles that we all should share and agree upon. And as long as we share and agree upon those fundamental principles, regardless of where we get them, democracy will thrive. Right. So I think the Christianity aspect is making a mess of it when we start thinking of it that way.
That's much more how I would have read the book also. So instead of, I think that Jen and Matt considered the book perhaps from this perspective, and I may be wrong, that we should get on board with Christianity because the principles work for democracy. I would read the book as the principles work for democracy. So y'all religious people, you need to get on board with democracy because because you're sacrificing democracy in many ways. You're, fighting wars over over religion and things, and culture wars, maybe right now in the US. And so you need to come back over to the democracy side. And I feel like maybe, so we can look at this from both directions, right?
Mhm.
And so I don't necessarily see Roush arguing that we need Christianity, that democracy needs Christianity so much as as much as Christianity needs to come back,
I think
over.
I would expand that. It's not, it's not just Christianity's fault. I would say,
Right.
any deviation from those fundamental principles
Right.
is what's eroding democracy, or any idea that, we are the better people or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Any these kind of things, which religious beliefs can lead to, right? They can say, well, we are better. We're the ones who are closer to God. We're going to tell you guys how you should behave, and we're going to force you guys to pray in school and blah, blah, blah. There's all that kind of stuff. But then there's plenty of other versions of that as well. But the thing that they have in common is that they are all undermining those foundational principles that we've been talking about.
Right.
And if they do that, they're a problem. They're threatening our this beautiful kind of democratic balance act that we're doing, this experiment.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that that democracy informs better Christianity, and morality, independent morality, informs better religion. It's not religion that's informing morality. It's not Christianity that's informing democracy. It's directional. It's the other way.
I would say that's correct. Yeah. Jen and I talked about this too. I think people put the cart before the horse.
Right.
Okay.
People, and I know Elizabeth will be down with this, but there's evidence that morality existed before insert religion here. Right.
Wow.
And so to me, what that means is, especially given my understanding of, what is morality, what are ethics, what are these rules? They're basically, if we all do this, we will be better off. That's basically what's going on.
But
Someone
it's better
decided,
to
hey,
have a cool story about those things, right?
Sure.
We're trying to teach our children, like, you know what? Sometimes you do it because I said so, and that's not good enough, right?
It's
So
not. I've always hated that.
No, yeah. So you tell stories, and we tell ourselves stories, and
Right.
so this gets back to your narrative, and so pretty soon we have an entire, a book or books or whatever, we have Grimm's fairy tales, and we have,
but they are moral frameworks, right? It's
Right.
us talking to ourselves and each other about how to navigate this experience, this thing.
Well, and can I propose a different way of looking at that, which is that morality, democracy, and Christianity, to the degree that they're both seeking truth, they both inform one another. And we can argue about chicken and egg, but ultimately we just know that there are chickens and that there are eggs, and we're not sure what comes first, but we need to do a better job of taking care of both. And you might think, well, no, let's just have one or the other, but I think to the degree that we have a philosophy of truth, and we're looking at revealed truth, whether that truth is revealed through the scientific method or it's revealed through divine means according to the circumstances of someone's life, there are a number of ways that truth can manifest itself, and whether it's morality infusing religion or religion infusing morality, both I think can does morality survive without religion? Well, there's a lot of evidence that it does, but intergenerationally does it? That's where I think there is some value in the religion, is the intergenerational transmission of these values and the intergenerational transmission of truths and lessons learned from prior generations and from prior people, that you're not having to reinvent the wheel and reinvent the scientific method, that you can learn from those things. So
I agree with that. I would actually I would take it a step further. I would say democracy, Christianity, and morality are all endeavors toward the same goal,
Yes,
which is living a better life, right? This system of
exactly.
government is the worst one except for all the others, right?
Yeah.
And we've decided this one works the best so far. And what do we mean by that? What we mean is, well, more people flourish. That's
Hmm.
really what we mean. I know people don't think about that necessarily in that way, but that's really what we're doing. And morality, all right, here are the rules. If you follow them, your life is going to be better, right? Here's a belief system, Christianity. If you follow this, your life will be better. That's what's going on. That's the project we're engaged in fundamentally. So then it just becomes about, all right, well, what are the trade-offs and what are the things that aren't really working anymore? And do we have to keep them? Can we move forward? Can we adapt or adopt and, move around, right? So we don't have a pure democracy. We have a representative democracy. It's more of a republic, right? It gets more complicated because we start figuring out tweaking the dials and doing all these things. So I think that's great. Part of the problem with traditional organized religion is the rigidity. If you don't
Yes.
believe this thing, you are no longer part of this group. And so now all the generous protections and all the benefits you no longer may have, right? Like that's kind of how the deal works in many, many cases.
Hmm.
What I say is, why can't we just take all the good stuff and the stuff that isn't working for us anymore because scientific evidence has disputed it or whatever, we move on without it. And as for the one thing that's left, which is that sense of meaning, that sense of purpose, that intergenerational transmission of the moral values, I'm an artist. That's what we do. That's what art is. That's what books are. Books are time travel. Books are
Hmm.
humans talking to each other across the ages, right? That's what this guy is. Superman is a story we tell ourselves about how to be a good person. That's what all of it is. Our media, our entertainment, it's all humans talking to themselves and each other about what we're doing, what this is, why we're here. Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it sad? Isn't it terrifying? Isn't it hilarious? That's the intergenerational transmission of our values, our beliefs, our thoughts. There it is right there. I mean, that's really what's going on, right? When we tell the story of Job or we tell the story of Jonah and the whale, we're telling the story of Superman and Batman and, Bluey, whatever, right? It's stories. We're telling ourselves stories. These characters represent things. They represent ideas and ideals. They represent lessons, Aesop's fables, Grimm's fairy tales, all these things. I see them as unified in that pursuit. It's
And
just some people have decided these particular stories are more special because, there's a cosmic deity that, did the thing. But if you take a step away from that for just a second, you recognize that all that is us telling ourselves and each other the things that matter, the things that we're worried about, the things that we care about, the things that we're wondering about. And we tell them to our children. Our children grow up wondering and thinking about them, creating their own stories, finding their own stories, and it just keeps going like that.
and without those stories, we would have to learn everything the hard way, right?
Right.
Yeah,
And that would result in a lot of,
exactly.
pain, death, destruction, all of those things. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, we don't learn everything the hard way because we do follow some rules, sometimes on faith, right? Not,
Mhm.
the faith of our parents, or out of fear, our parents told us to do that or not do that. So we don't do it because, and
Yeah.
they told us a story, sometimes stories told about, bad things that happen, fear, right? And to keep your kid from doing some of those things. And it speeds up the process. And then, like you said, Angel, it allows us then to create our own stories and embellish our stories, because we have that foundation, from which to build. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So can I do just a brief experiment? I don't even know if this will work.
I love this. Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know if you can do this. We have the Constitution of the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
You believe in the Constitution of the United States of America. Would you say you believe in it? This is not a trick. This is not okay.
Or yeah, I agree with the principles that it espouses. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So yes, I believe in it.
Okay. Very good. So there we go. So would it impact your belief or your relationship with the Constitution if you believed? Now, put on your try and be a theist here, a believer here. If you believe that the Constitution was divinely inspired, would it make a difference in any way?
I'm trying to make sure that I think about this before answering.
Thank you.
Because I mean, I've thought about this before, but I don't think so. But it depends on what you mean, right? Like, so if
God
I had
inspired the Constitution of the United States of America, would that
Right.
If you were a believer, if you believed that there was a God who inspired a government, it was the Constitution of the United States of America.
I would have a lot of questions because slavery is not in there, and there's all those problems. But no,
but it is now.
Sure, but you would think. So I think honestly, what my reaction would be if I believed that, I would say, that's incredible. Isn't that amazing? The creator of the universe drafted this document.
Well, it's not perfect. I mean, that's why it has amendments.
Well,
but inspired it.
Then why the heck isn't, so this goes to Angel's question. Why the heck isn't it perfect? I mean, this would concern me.
Well, he said inspired.
This would,
so
okay,
there's the telephone game there.
Okay.
So there's room for error because of the scribe.
Right.
So I can grant that. So I would say that's amazing. And I would find that mind-blowing and mind-boggling. But I don't think that it would affect the principles themselves in terms of, or my appreciation of the principles themselves, right? It would affect my appreciation of how they came about, right? Like, I think the founding fathers were brilliant men. They're flawed, obviously, but obviously also brilliant men. I find that incredible. And I find the ideas that they drafted to be good, sound ones that we should live by for the most part, especially the things like working amendments into it and all that kind of stuff, right? So I'm in awe of that.
Yeah.
And I agree with the principles, but I agree with them based on my reasoning that they actually function the best, as far as I can tell, that they function very, very well and lead to flourishing, right? So if I thought that they didn't, for some reason, or if I had some real beef with some aspect of it, the fact that it was divinely inspired would not change the contentions that I have, right? I would still feel something is wrong here and I don't understand it, because, and as I'm saying this, I'm remembering that this is what my experience was like growing up, right? There were these things that I truly believed God said, but they didn't make sense to me. And I had questions and I just thought it's my fault. I clearly am not getting it. Let me ask the authorities. And I'm talking to these people and I'm asking them these questions and they're giving me answers. And I'm like, okay, but it still doesn't work. I don't understand. Yeah. I asked the next guy, right? So
you
I still have
where
this.
You're fluent, which is, to me, it doesn't make a difference because it is true. It does. I mean, it does work. It does work for me. It's stuff that I do believe in. I don't need to believe in it. But what I'm hearing you say is, if I were to know that the Constitution was divinely inspired by the creator of the universe, of the cosmos, the galaxies, that would be amazing to you.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's an amazing thing to know.
Would it influence how you defended the Constitution, or will you say no, because I defended already I stand up for it already. Would it make it different if
Yeah.
the Constitution ceased to work for you, your own interests?
Mhm.
Would you continue to believe in it?
No, I am definitely the fallen angel of of Milton. I'm definitely the one who says, "Well, hold on a second. I do not take authority on, just on its own, right? Like my parents weren't just right because they were my parents. They had to actually be right.
Yeah.
They had to actually answer my questions. They had to
Right.
actually make sense.
Right.
Because I said so is not a good answer. And yeah, you have power over me, so I have to do what you say, but I'm not going to like it, and I'm still going to have these questions. So I think it's just my temperament, right?
Right.
So even if
it's just hard to
even if I believe the creator of the universe inspired this document, that's an amazing thing to know about what happened, but it doesn't change that the tenets in that document have to justify themselves. They are not justified by the creator of the universe or the fact that they were drafted by the creator of the universe. They still have to make sense to me in order for me, given, in this scenario, the brain that this creator gave me forces me to ask these questions and need it to make.
So the belief in the creator is the faith, but it has to be combined with reason.
Well, if if there's some dissonance there, I have to resolve that dissonance.
Yeah.
Because this was my experience, right? I really badly wanted to be a good, pious boy. I wanted to make sure I was doing the right thing, following the rules, doing everything the way I was supposed to, because it's really, really important, right? There's like huge stakes.
Yeah.
So I was very diligent about this. But I couldn't just take the rule for what it is. I had to understand the rule. Right. It had to make sense to me. And if we're talking about the article of, the article of faith for me was, it must make sense because God made it. So it's my fault if I don't understand it, and it's my job to pursue understanding. But that, unfortunately, that led me to start chipping away at all those articles of faith. And that's the effect that it had, right? So it would be the same thing. If the Constitution, if I believed it was drafted by or inspired by the creator of the universe, that's my fundamental belief. I would still have a problem with this amendment or the fact that this is missing from the document or whatever. I would have questions, and I would assume I would give the benefit of the doubt. There must be some explanation. There must be something I'm not getting, and I would pursue that knowledge. But it would still have to.
So that's what faith is the pursuit of knowledge in the face of ambiguity. A step into the dark of something that you don't understand.
Right. Yeah, sure. But I'm going to hit that brick wall of, this is grounded on something that I have no reason to believe in anymore.
Yeah.
And so what happens if I just don't believe it anymore? Right? Like, that's what happened to me. What happened to me is, by high school, I went through all the phases of, it's just that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. No, actually, these guys don't know what they're talking about. You know what? This building is wrong. You know what? This institution is wrong. But there's still a thing, right? So I'm just slowly peeling away the layers and getting all the way to, I believe that there is some kind of creator being something, right? Sure. Like what I would have told you in 10th grade was, I believe in something. There's something, right? And then a couple of years later, I'm interrogating more, and I'm saying, well, what is the something? What is the nature of it? What do I know about it? And I realized nothing. The answer is nothing. I don't know anything about it. So how do I know it's even there? I don't.
So I'd like to flip this around and say, what if people believe that the Constitution was inspired by, the divine, and they don't question that, and they believe it without that reflection and deep thinking? That to me feels very dangerous. And so I would say that, if I believed that, I would be more scared. I would be more scared for our democracy. I would be more scared for humanity, because we already see that, right?
The belief is fragile. Yeah.
In pockets where if someone was divinely chosen to be the leader, then we see blind, ignoring exactly what you're talking about, Angel. Like, well, if this, then what about that? And we see just sort of the refusal to see those kinds of things. So I would say that if it were a widespread belief that it was inspired by the divine, that we would be even worse off. And so I hope let's not propagate that.
Well, no. Well, here's my response to that is, if you do an either or, then then I would agree. If this was just, this is just what it's only based on a principle of faith rather than faith and reason, and you're not combining the two, you're taking faith out of its context. You're putting faith now you're taking belief into government, and you're imposing a theology into the government. Whereas there's a difference between belief and reason, or faith and reason, but they can support each other. In your support of the Constitution, if it's informed by both faith and reason, I think you're going to have an impact. And I've seen that impact myself, in that sometimes it would feel like this isn't working, but over time, if you give it some time, it will work its way out. And that's what I think we've seen with the Constitution. The proof is in the pudding. It's endured for a very long time. Some have said that it's the longest governing document in the history of humanity. I don't know how to prove that, but it's been very resilient, and to believe that it's divinely inspired can augment and strengthen the adherence to that. And that was part of the speech that Jonathan Rauch heard, that moved him to consider some of the writings in the book, was the belief that the Constitution, Dallin H. Oaks said, I believe in the Constitution. I believe it was divinely inspired. That's a tenet of our faith.
Do you believe that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I still go back to the thing of, I don't know I don't know what that variable is doing.
Yeah. Well, that's what I say. It's a little experiment. I don't know if this will even work, but just you entertaining this and having this conversation, it certainly does strengthen the support for that Constitution, because there was a time when that Constitution didn't protect or preserve my family, my ancestors. Sure. And it had a really
Mine too.
There were folks who took some things out of context, and right. It wasn't working for my faith.
Yeah.
But there were still people within my faith, when the Army came and said, we need a battalion to go fight the Mexican-American War, they said, all right.
All right, let's do it.
Mormon battalion.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I can offer a similar premise. The fact that there are amendments to the Constitution, right?
Exactly.
That it's a living document.
Yeah.
Betrays a knowledge of our own fallibility.
Correct.
Which in my view eliminates the idea of divine inspiration, because even mere divine inspiration should probably have included something like slavery being wrong, right? And I mean, we know that was something that the founders grappled with, right? They discussed it. It didn't make the cut. Didn't make the first draft, right? or the final draft, I should say,
right,
of that initial thing, right? But they worked into it a system by which the document can be amended, and that's one of the reasons why it has survived. Exactly. If it were etched in stone from back then, there's no way it would have survived. it would have been shattered and something else would have been drafted in its place. So that's one thing. And also that process by which we amend, given our evolution as a society, given the things that we learn and the things that we grow to understand and the things that we finally settle on and agree on, we amend this document to better reflect our values and virtues in the moment, in the present moment, right? That's a scientific process, I would say. That's a process of recognizing ignorance, acquiring knowledge bit by bit, and then revising based on that acquisition of knowledge. So that's the brilliance of it, right? Now you can say that brilliance is divinely inspired, right? But again, I just don't see any need for it, right? It's just a fact. We know that the founders drafted it this way, and it turned out to be a really good idea. And the system of amending it is a brilliant one. And it reflects a really high-minded awareness of human nature. And it's worked this beautiful way, but it's a process of iteration and improvement and learning. And, there are amendments that strike out other amendments, right? So it's this constant process of learning and growing, which is what human life is, which is what the human process is. So I think that's beautiful. And I don't know that it would, honestly, the more I think about it, the more I would think that the creator of the universe would do a better job.
No, I don't think so. We're human and we're supposed to struggle. I mean, look at Jesus's life. He came down and all he did was struggle. And so I think I don't want a perfect life. If we have perfection, why is there even life? If there's not something to work through, why are we even here? I mean, a part of what you say, Angel, of the beauty of life is like these like anomalies and weirdness and like we're atoms and blah, blah, blah. And I think we are meant to struggle. And I think that we are meant to like work things out. So
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. But for example, we would say we're at a point in 2025 where the kinds of struggles that people should be having, or let's say starving to death, is a problem that nobody should be struggling with, right? That should be a struggle that's in the past. That should be one that we've figured out, right? I think we probably would agree. Like starving to death is probably, that should be off the menu, right? We can say we've gone far enough in human history that shouldn't still be a thing that happens to people.
Yeah.
Right. So in that kind of way, that's what I mean by, if the creator of the universe is going to set us up with some foundational rules to start with, I would expect certain things that took us 100 years to get to would have been there from the beginning. And I would be skeptical of any kind of argument saying, well, maybe he intentionally kept those things off because we needed to learn that lesson. A lot of people learn that lesson in a very, very hard way. A lot of people suffered for us to learn that lesson. So that leads me to question all these other things that we don't want. We don't want to get into right now.
That's just cruelty. No, and also like I'm glad I would never want to take that. It's like if it makes you feel better that when you're suffering, you think that God would never give you more than you can bear and all that. Like I would never want to take that from you. But don't say that to me. because that does not make me, it makes me feel so the only way for me to feel comfortable with a God is with a God who doesn't give a shit about me. Because otherwise God is childhood cancer. Come on. Like, where do you get off? What kind of lesson is that? So no, I mean, there's no, I don't want to take that away from somebody else, but that ain't comforting. Not at all. Not at all.
The way that I have thought about that, because obviously that's the problem of suffering, right? And it's a big question. It's a huge challenge for for Christians and religious people in particular. And yeah, I don't really see a way out of it, right? Because the answer that I've gotten many times is, well, we need to struggle. Like that's resistance is what builds growth, right? You need to work muscles out. You need to struggle in order to grow. That's true. But let's shrink the idea down, right? Think about being a parent. Now, I'm not a parent. I'm not sure. I can't remember now if any of you are, but there are certain things that you will allow your child to struggle through, right? If they're on their bike struggling to keep their balance, you might let them fall a little bit. You might you don't want to coddle too much, because then they won't be able to grow and be someone who can ride a bike and go off on their own, right? But if they get hit by a car and break their leg, you're going to go and help them. And if you see them walking into the way of a car, and they will get hit if you do nothing, you would do something, because that's your child, right? You would never let them come onto that kind of harm, right? So there's a limiting principle to this notion of, well, it'll build character, they'll grow from it, they'll learn, right? There are certain things that it would be unconscionable for you to even consider, right? Letting them be sick and not giving them medicine, having them break their limbs, allowing someone to get mugged, things like that, right? There are things where you would go, no, I would stop that, because that's clearly beyond the pale. So again, if now zooming back out to the cosmic thing, there are certain things that I would expect the creator of the universe, who is omnipotent and benevolent, to just simply not allow.
Well, maybe that's why he gives us parents.
Well, but parents can't do anything about, for example, a kid born with some crazy degenerative disorder, struggling for 10 minutes and then dying. That's its entire life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's rough. And the immediate question, if you're in the framework of there's a God and this is all happening for a reason, the immediate question, the obvious question is, why on earth would you do this? Why would you allow this? And
there are theological reasons that just aren't going to make sense. They're things, they're tenets of faith. And so, whatever you believe, anything that we're going to say are things that you can prove or not, that they're not provable, they're not disprovable. This is where agency comes into place, and choices. And ultimately, our lives are about our choices. Our lives are about what we choose to believe, we choose to do, and those choices that we make. If you had to choose between, in terms of priority, to take away choice, so we didn't have any choices, but life was perfect and idealistic, and God just took care of all that stuff for us, because we didn't have to make any choices. We didn't have to, and I'm not saying that people, that all bad things are because of people's choices. I want to make sure we're clear that that's not what I'm saying. Yeah. But if you had to choose between choices and slavery or childhood cancer, all right, we can get rid of slavery and childhood cancer, but we can't. But you'd have to get rid of people's ability to make choice. Which would you prefer?
Well, I think that's a false dichotomy, though, because getting back to the parenting thing, there are some things as a parent you would allow because you have to let your kid learn how to grow up, right? There's certain kinds of suffering, there's certain amounts of suffering that you would allow because that's your job, is to raise them into someone who can take care of themselves. But there's also a line, right? So the question you wouldn't frame that question as, well, would you rather just completely 100% coddle your kid or let them suffer every indignity and horror in the world, right? You wouldn't create that dichotomy there. You would say, no, I mean, obviously, as their parent, it's my job to protect them from certain things, but it's also my job as a parent to allow them to struggle through certain things, because part of my job as a parent is to raise them to become self-sufficient human beings. So it's the same thing on the cosmic level, right?
So a benevolent God would have parameters around suffering. He wouldn't allow infinite suffering. He would just allow a little bit of suffering.
Well, presumably there would be certain things that simply make no sense to allow. And the hypothetical I gave, a baby born with some degenerative disorder, right? It's not even something that is the result of the actions of the parents, right? You can, because if it's something about a baby born with AIDS or something, you can point to the parents and say their behavior is the result. But some random genetic accident, this baby is born, suffers for 10 minutes and dies. What is the point of that life? And is it worth that? Right? Was there
I could
no
tell you
other
those
way?
things. I could actually speak
You know?
from experience
Yeah.
because I've had to make those kinds of decisions. That my fourth son, my wife's water broke when he was 18 weeks pregnant. When she was 18 weeks pregnant, and
Yeah.
so these are things we had to do. So why would we do this? Well, those things are those are religious,
Yeah.
spiritual kinds of things decisions that we just had to make, and it was my faith that informed our decision making, and he might have feelings one way or the other about his parents' decisions, but
Right.
I mean, those are things where it's just like, all right, this is where my faith actually came into play. My faith came into action. And you're right. When I was going through it wasn't fun. And I was wondering, what's the point? And I was wondering, who thinks this is fun? Or who thinks this is, I mean, I have empathy for those beliefs because I actually experienced them. But being on the other end of it, I think that ultimately those questions are things that we'll never agree on just because they're choices and beliefs, the beliefs that we have, and about the belief and about beliefs about life itself and the purpose and nature of life itself.
Right. But again, it in my view starts poking at this idea of the reason why we suffer is because without suffering there's no meaning, right? But there is a ceiling on that idea. And there are experiences of suffering that we can imagine and that in fact happen constantly that just don't make any sense with that premise. And so you'd have to then reconsider the premise and say, okay, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe there's something else going on. And the other thing that I hear is, well, we just don't understand what the plan is. And sure, maybe I don't. And to the extent that I don't, one result of that is that I go, this plan sucks. And, hey, if you've got the insight, if anybody has the insight they can hit me with that will make this make sense to me, go ahead. I would love to. But until then, I'm going to say the plan sucks. If it's a plan, if that's what it is, it sucks. And I expect more from a divine being. That's my feeling of it. And I don't like that feeling. Right. So I'm unhappy with that feeling. But it's the position I have to put myself in, given what I know and understand and the dynamics that I'm witnessing. Like certain things just don't make sense, and some conclusions seem inevitable as a result. And I'm asked all the time, if you die and you meet your maker, and you've said all these things and you've done all these things, and you weren't a believer and da 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 da, what would you do? What would you say? I would say, well, I forget who was I think Bertrand Russell was asked a similar question, and he said, well, I would just ask, sir, why did you take such pains to hide yourself? But I would add, I did the best I could with the mind you gave me.
Yeah. And there will be grace.
That'd be nice. I mean, I tried my best.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good place for us to end. We will continue our conversations into I think next month we are talking about faith and reason. So more.
Oh, great.
It's difficult. Yeah. Problems, issues.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Thank you for your grace, all of you. I think it was fun. I hope it wasn't just fun for me.
No, it was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and for our audience too. So thank you everyone for joining us in the audience. For any questions or suggestions on where we take these conversations, please get in touch with us at ilvalues.org. And everyone have a fabulous evening. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.